The resilience concept and thinking really offers a key entry point to integrate environment with other socioeconomic data as well as the actions upon these. And this is not new because environment is such an important driver of many of the shocks and stresses that we are observing, as well as we need this critical environmental health also to build resilience in our systems. Now, we can distinguish three overall ways to integrate environmental variables into resilience measurement. One is these environmental variables as a driver of shock and variability. And one way that we have been doing this in the project, as part of a project called Vital Signs, is to monitor the anomaly of an outcome indicator, for example, yield of income, versus the anomaly of an environmental indicator, for example, temperature or rainfall. And mapping that out, you can see which regions, in which regions yields have been vulnerable to changes or anomalies in climate, and which regions have more buffering capacity for that, and how this is changing over time. The second way is the environmental variables as sensitive variables to shocks. Population growth is an incredible stress for an environment, and this is very context specific on what kind of metrics or indicators are then or can then be measured from an environmental perspective. For example, water balance, habitat degradation, or aquatic ecosystems. The health of aquatic ecosystems and fish diversity is also very vulnerable to the changes that are happening in the world. So that's the second thing. The third thing is environmental variables as indicators of a buffering capacity or resilience in the system. And examples of that have been mentioned also in other sessions, in parallel sessions, is one is the biodiversity that provides us options for the future. So that gives us an insight on the capacity of choice, on the number of choices available in the system. Another is also land use, land cover. Forests have shown to play an important buffering wall also for certain changes and walls. Now, these three pieces, environmental variables as drivers of shocks, as sensitive to shocks, and as indicators of buffering capacity, it's easy to say that, but what are some of the processes that can actually facilitate the integration of environmental variables in these ways? And one really important one that we experience is the facilitation of use of these variables, because actually there are already more data available than is often known. A quick question would be like, how many of you do actually use environmental variables in their day-to-day decision making? And on one hand, this facilitation can be done by linking the monitoring more to an action and response framework directly, and not only on the social variables, but also an action and response framework on the environmental side. And some other more straightforward things, but very important one, is also the capacity building of using these data at every level. So participatory monitoring of environmental variables really engages also the community in monitoring, but also using these data. And easy to use templates. In environmental science, we love maps. So, and changes over time. So to make data sexy actually to use, we are trying to do that in some ways. And also to integrate the use of environmental data more on day-to-day program planning, and not only in program design, but also in program monitoring and evaluation. Often environmental variables are very important confounding factors, but they are not integrated into some of the analysis when we study resilience or other changing patterns. So, and often environmental variables like climate are used in anticipation, but once the response starts, they are not used anymore. So to continue using it, I'm pledging a bit for use environmental variables in what you're doing, because it's the context we are working on, and more environmental variables are becoming available. The second important mechanism to do it is to bridge different scales. And we have several techniques also now to do that. One is a nested hierarchical sampling. The project Vital Signs is also doing that, so that you can link data that makes sense at the household and plot level to data that makes sense at a larger landscape or regional level. And then and that also for temporal scales, because environmental variability is important at short and long. And then a fourth very important mechanism or process is also to include as much as possible information about uncertainty of things and the variability of things, which is very important for decision making.